Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is an interior designer and the former wife of a Saudi sheik. She is the author of the nonfiction book Jeddah Bride, which is a memoir primarily about her former marriage and life in Saudi Arabia as an American-born woman. Her name is Patricia Bonis, and my interview with Patricia will follow the note-taking sounds. Patricia Bonis, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I was looking forward to it today.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I'm Patricia Bonis. I am here on this wonderful podcast show because I wrote a book about, it's a memoir about my life. And when I was very young, and I married a Saudi Arabian man. Wait, let me just put this on silent. I married a Saudi Arabian man that I met in college and married him, fell in love and married, and had a crazy marriage, which ended in divorce. I was living in Saudi Arabia, which most people have never seen what I've seen. And that was all, that could have been the end of that story, and I could have just gone on to having a different life. But what really happened in the end was that my two children were kidnapped by my ex-husband and brought to Saudi Arabia and held in Saudi Arabia for 14 years, no contact with me. So that's what made me write this book. And I want to add that I'm an American. I grew up in New York in a beach town on Long Island. I was just a regular kid. I used to, go swimming all summer and riding, water skiing and a normal high school life. Graduated from Shriver High in Port Washington and went to Wellesley College after that in Massachusetts, which is where I met this Saudi Arabian gentleman, who isn't that much of a gentleman, to tell you the truth. So that's my story.
You are an interior designer by trade. What is your work as an interior designer like?
Oh, I love it. Okay. So when I ended up back in the United States, childless, I realized I was not even 30 years old. I realized that let me pursue what I always wanted to do, which is interior design. I'm kind of artsy. I paint. I used to do things like knitting and sewing, and I wanted to be a fashion designer and all that. Okay, love color and I love texture. So I went back to school at the New York School of Interior Design, and I became an interior designer, and I've been doing this ever since. It's more than 35 years that I'm doing this as my career. I love it. It's interesting. I get to work with different people. I'm good at it. I enjoy it. And I've had international jobs. I've had local jobs. I've done commercial projects and I've done residential projects. So it's really a big part of my life, a big, big chunk of my life. And I will add, I had one additional child, Amanda. She's my youngest. She's an American girl born here. And that's sort of what comforted me during the time when my other two children were beyond my reach. And I, of course, remarried. And I have a happy life. And now I have been reunited with my children and my Saudi children. And so it's sort of a complete, other than the pain and the memories that I had to experience, I have a pretty good life. I can't complain.
Your memoir is called Jeddah Bride, excuse me. Without spoiling too much about your memoir, what is it about?
Well, Jeddah Bride, and that was hard to pick the title. I had so many titles that I considered at the time, and in the end, Jeddah Bride is what I settled on. And why? Because I am the Jeddah Bride. Jeddah is the city in Saudi Arabia where I lived for several years with my children and my ex-husband. Jeddah is a place, it's not the capital of Saudi Arabia, which is Riyadh. where the king lives. It is the second city of Saudi Arabia. It's a commercial city. It's on the Red Sea. It's across from Africa. And it's a very different culture than the rest of Saudi Arabia. It has a lot of, but it does have the religion and the strict way of life. And so I call myself the Jeddah Bride because what is a Jeddah Bride? It's a woman with no rights. It's a woman that Jeddah and all the religion in Saudi Arabia and all that really defines you in that part of the world. And you become anonymous. You become one of many with no individuality, no ability to speak out, to fight for yourself, to get what you deserve or what really is right. You just have to be a Jeddah bride. You're an anonymous woman married to someone, and that's it. You're oppressed and part of the system. And that's what I discovered when I had, this marriage and I went there. I was my life was like I was completely anonymous without rights. And it's a shocking thing because we really do take for granted our so-called rights in this country. We really think they're God-given and we deserve them, and that's not the way it is over there at all.
What was it like to fall in love with a Saudi sheik?
Okay. So let's look back. I was just 18 years old. Now, I don't know one 18-year-old that knows what they're doing. I mean, and I was raised very strictly. I ended up going to an all-girls college, Wellesley, although it's a fine university at the time and still up until now, it's all girls, all women. And because my parents didn't want me getting involved with men and they wanted me to be safe and sound, that's why I ended up there. So here I go out to a party, 18 years old, and this sports car drives up outside the apartment building where the party was being held in Boston. And my friends knew the driver of that car. And so he pulled over and I looked in and I see this exotic looking man. Um, I'd never seen an Arab in my life. I didn't even know what they looked like. And I was like, oh my God, who's that? And he opens his mouth and talks with a British accent, so British that you were like, why is he speaking like that? Who is he? Where's he from? So I was very curious. And it turned out that he was Saudi Arabian. He'd been raised in England, had gone to boarding school his whole life in England, and he was very sophisticated, very kind and gentle, very philosophical, almost like a guru. It was just after the hippie era. He kind of reminded me of someone like Elton John, all like flamboyant, British. He dressed flamboyantly. So, yeah, he was different than American guys. And I have to say, American guys at the time when I was in college, that's like the late 70s, um, they were all, ripped jeans, going to bars and standing around drinking beer and having frat parties. And this guy drives up in a fancy car, with all his stories of European adventures and takes me out to restaurants for dinner, took me out to nightclubs, took all my friends, paid for all my friends to come. It was like a whole nother world, and I actually fell for it. I liked it. And that's what it was like dating him. It wasn't the same, however, marrying him and going back to Saudi Arabia. That's where it all changed.
What freedoms did you have to give up to live in Saudi Arabia as the wife of a sheik?
Okay. First of all, I I had to change my religion. This had never happened before. There were other foreign women who married Saudis before me. I knew most of them personally because there were very few of us, maybe 2 dozen. And none of them had to change their religion. They were mostly Christian. They were from Spain, France, the United States, Greece. They all got to keep their religion. But I think the government at the time, King Faisal, was getting fed up with all these foreign women coming into Saudi and marrying the Muslim men. And so they made a new law that if a woman is a foreigner and wants to marry with a Saudi man, she has to become a Muslim. I actually did it. It's very easy to do. It took me about a week. And all I had to learn was the prayer that they pray 5 times a day. And I did it. And I had Muslim papers. And so I got married. So first I had to give up my religion, which I didn't mind because, religion's in the heart. That's what I've always felt. And I wasn't really such a seriously religious Catholic to begin with. Then, when you're there, you have to give up everything else. Number one, you can't have a bank account because you're a foreigner and you're a woman. Number two, you can't drive because you're a woman. Number three, you can't walk in the streets or do anything for that matter outside your house because you're a woman. Number four, you have to cover yourself. If you ever go in the car or go out, you can't have your hair showing and you can't have your body showing. So you have to wear this black cloak over your body and you have to kind of put this scarf, this long scarf, or wrap it around your head. And in Jeddah, because it is across from Africa and there's a lot of trade and a lot of people coming from Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt, they were more close in their dressing, their attire to the Egyptians, and that meant that you don't wear that thing over your face. I think they call it the hijab. It covers your face, and you've got a slit for your eyes. They did not do that in Jeddah. So what you had to do was cover your head with a scarf and wrap it around your head, kind of, and put it under your neck so that only your face could show from your eyebrows down to your chin. Okay, so that's kind of what I was supposed to do there. What other rights did I lose? Well, as I later found out, I lost the right to keep my children when I divorced. Um, I lost the right to buy anything like property. I couldn't spend money, invest money, have my own bank account, have my own anything. Not that I had much money. I was basically living on my husband's money, but had I wanted to, and I could not work. So my dream when I was in college, at the time I had studied art history, and I thought stupidly that I could go to Saudi Arabia and marry this guy, and we'd be so happy, and I could open an art gallery. I could sell paintings to rich Saudis. This is what I thought I could do. Well, you can't. I couldn't have a store. I couldn't have men come into a store and see me there. I couldn't have art because art is forbidden, all kinds of art. And I thought maybe it's just figurative art, meaning paintings of people. No, even landscapes were not allowed. So I couldn't sell art. I couldn't work. I couldn't walk around. I couldn't drive. I couldn't. So what could I do? And I always felt that it's easier, instead of listing all the many, many things you cannot do, it's easier to list what you can do, which is very limited. You can stay in your own house and have company. You can go visit your husband's family, or had I had my own family, had I been Saudi, I could have visited them. And you can go to ladies' gatherings, which are birth, like when you celebrate the birth, almost like a baptism. They call it a Rahmani. You can go to Rahmanis, you can go to engagement parties with other ladies only, you can go to weddings with other ladies only, and you can go to other ladies' houses and sit there and talk and then be driven home by your chauffeur. That's what I could do in Saudi Arabia and have people over my house. That's it. That's it. Basically, that's what I did.
How long did it take you to write your memoir?
Well, when I got back and my children, when I got back to America with and my children were taken from me, um, there was no way that I was even considering writing a book because I was just so distraught for many years, many, many years. I couldn't contact them. I was fighting with the State Department and lawyers. Basically, I sold everything I had including my house, to pay the lawyer's bills to try to get my kids back, but nothing succeeded. So what I basically I didn't think about writing a book. I would never consider at that in that situation writing a book. It would have been so horrible and so tragic. And what was the end result? I didn't know whether I'd ever get them back again. So I certainly didn't write the book then or even consider it. Although many people said, "Oh, you should write a book." But of course I didn't. I will tell you, after 14 years, the day that I got information that my son was in fact at Boston University starting college. And so I decided I got a private investigator to find his address. And I got in the car and I drove up to Boston and I saw my son. That is the first chapter of the book. That next day, after I met with my son, he had dinner with me, and I promised him we would get to know each other again. I hadn't seen him since he was 4. He was now 18. That drive back home from Boston was the moment that I decided to write a book, because I started the first chapter with that day when I drove up there and I knocked on my son's door and he answered the door. He didn't know who I was. He smiled and said, "Who are you?" And I told him, "I'm your mother." That was the first chapter of the book. After that, it took me several years to write. I did it chapter by chapter. I made an attempt after I'd written 5 solid chapters. I made an attempt to get a literary agent, but I'll be honest, nobody was interested. I could not get anyone to even consider my book. And I realized that what I'm going to have to do, instead of writing 5 chapters and then getting a deal and then, making a contract and then having, the responsibility to complete the book, I realized I just have to write this whole damn book on my own, which I did. And I ended up writing a book that was 600 pages long. When, when I finally got a literary agent, probably 10 years after I started, because don't forget, I was working as a designer and I had a whole life that I had to be responsible for. When I finally did get a literary agent, they said, "Well, you have to cut the book in half. You can't write a 600-page book." So I cut a lot out of the book, and that's when I got successful, that we found a publisher and the book was published. But I was on the verge of self-publishing at that point because I'd put a lot of work into it. I had slimmed it down. It was a nice 300-page book, and I felt that it was an important story that should be told. And I was one step away from self-publishing, but I did get a publisher, and I'm glad for that, because it's a complicated business, publishing your own book, if you don't know anything about it.
Who was your literary agent, and what was the pub and what company published your book?
Okay, Keith Corman is my literary agent, and he actually came from a family of literary agents. His Rains and Rains, his parents were in the business. They actually published Deliverance and Forrest Gump. So they had some very big blockbusters, which they brought to the screen but that's decades ago. But I just think they felt that my story was and authentic. That Keith said when he read it. He said, "This is really an authentic story, and I think it'll make a great book." Then he introduced me to, he put it out to a few publishers, and Conservatarian Press is my publisher. They they met with me once over Zoom and said, "Why did you write this book?" And I guess they liked my answer. I really feel like it's an important story to be told. It's a very unique story, and it opens a lot of information about Saudi Arabia, about cross-cultural marriage, about loss, and about reinventing yourself, like resurrection, kind of resilience. So, and I didn't spare any details. Part of my healing process was through therapy and group therapy. And I think group therapy is the thing that really made a difference to me in my life. I was raised never to tell my personal business in public to anyone. Keep your personal stuff to yourself. And I would have never told this story had I not been 10 years in group therapy, telling everybody in that group and having to face their shock, their disgust, their criticism, their support, whatever it was that came at me. I realized I can withstand that. And so that's what really gave me the courage and the determination to get this book out there.
I'm going to let our listeners know a little bit about my mother, a who is an American woman who is definitely not a Muslim. But she, back in the 1980s, worked for a company here in the States. I think it was called Robin Tech, and they were a company that made PVC pipe. And one of the countries that PVC pipe got exported to was Saudi Arabia. And to say that the Saudi importer, when they found out the shop foreman was a woman, did not like that at all.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true. They didn't allow women, female executives into the country to do business. If you were a country, I mean, if you were a company anywhere in the world, you only sent men there. Now, supposedly, women are allowed to work. They've changed the law. They allow women to drive, but in that time, they wanted no women anywhere but sitting in their homes. It's true. It's not even an exaggeration.
I have one final question to finish this interview. What is it like to be a competitive equestrian rider, as you do compete in equestrian competitively? And what types of equestrian events do you compete in?
Okay, I love talking about this. I feel like I wish I could write a book about it, but I'm not good enough. I'm not a professional. I'm an amateur writer, but I have, like I've achieved more than most writers have, because I do compete and I do go to the best horse shows, the most. Okay, so what is it like? Um, I'll tell you that I always loved riding. I went to summer camp as a child. We did our little posting and cantering on the horse, English style riding. I enjoyed it a lot, but of course it's a very it's a tough sport to follow if you are living in a city. You can't really do that sport except if you are in a place where there's a lot of land and you have to have horses to have them be turned out and riding rings and et cetera, et cetera. It's very so I didn't go back to riding until I was pretty much in my late 20s, maybe almost 30. Because I'm working, I'm doing traveling. You can't do horses if you're not around. It's a sport you have to follow, do it every day. You own horses, it's a big responsibility. And competing, you have to be in shape. Otherwise, you can get hurt, very easily get hurt. So I went, I'll tell you why I went back. I was, as I said, I dilly-dallied in riding, but I wasn't a serious rider until I heard a rumor about my two children in Saudi Arabia. They were like 8 and 10 years old. I still hadn't seen them, but I heard they were riding horses there. And I thought, oh, okay, if I ever get them back, maybe I should go back to writing and I'll have some. I swear to you, I thought this. I thought I'll have something in common with them. And so I went to the local. I was living in suburban, outside of New York City at the time, working. I'd remarried. I went to the local riding facility and I said, I'd like to relearn to ride. I'd like to start, you know, and they were teaching English riding, which is what my children were doing, and jumping, show jumping, which is also what my children were doing in Saudi Arabia. So I started, I got into it. You have to own your own horse. You can never be a good rider, really good rider, unless you own a horse. You can ride other people's horses and do whatever, but you'll never really get to know a horse and get to the next level because you have to be in sync with that horse. So I got myself a horse and I would go 3 days a week and ride my horse. Then I'd go 4 days a week. Then I was doing five. You really have to ride 5 or 6 days a week in order to get to the next level of proficiency with show jumping. And you have to have your horse completely tuned into you. So it is an amazing sport. It is not just like going on a trail ride. It's like your horse is giving all they have to you, listening to every nuance of your body, and you are listening to every nuance of their body, and you're doing things that they wouldn't naturally do. They're jumping repeatedly over a series of jumps that are, they would never do that. So it's an amazing sport because you have trust with an animal, you have challenging yourself. Jump course, you realize that, oh my God, it looks scary. You have to go in there and you just have to do it. And there's a lot of injuries, there's a lot of danger in it. Horses get injured, people get injured, but you love it so much, you keep going. And that's how I was and how I still am. Um, One of the things that actually broke the ice when I saw my children again after 14 years was the horses. We talked about horses. They told me about their horses. I showed them my horse. They brought horses to America. My son was at BU. My daughter was at Wellesley. They brought their horses here. I used to go watch them. I understood the sport. We'd go to Florida together. Okay, so shows take place all at different times of the year based on the location and the climate. So in Florida, which is where I now live, there's horse showing for about 6 months of the year through the winter months. The World Equestrian Festival is in Wellington, Florida. That's a very big one. That's right near where I live. There's Ocala, which is another big horse facility. There's Tryon. And these horse shows have thousands and thousands of horses that people bring there to board for the duration of the show, which has, it could be a 2 month show, a 1 month show, a 6 month show, whatever it is. And it also, has many different riding rings, different speeds, and different styles of jumping. And you learn what your horse, you figure out what you and your horse are going to do well in, and that's what you compete in. And the competition, in Europe, it's a little different. And this sport takes place all over the world. It's competitive show jumping, and it's an Olympic sport. You ride. It's men against women. There is no men's sport and women's sport, which is a reason why I love it, because we don't have to deal with men competing against women, because in show jumping, men compete against women every day. What your levels are is your height that you jump is how they divide us. So it's strictly by the sport. If you can jump 3 feet, you're doing the 3 foot. If you jump 3'6", you do the 3'6". The highest height you could jump is like 5'6", I think, maybe 6 feet. That's considered world class, top level show jumping. Very few people in the world do that. And but my son does it actually. My son Kareem can do that. I don't. I jump about 3.5 feet. That's where I am. I'm kind of halfway there. But it's a very small, it's not a lot of people that do this. It's a small group. Everyone knows each other. We all watch each other. It's a wonderful sport. It's a very close sport where everyone kind of sees each other, watches each other. It's all televised. And it's a big part of my life. So that's what it's like being in show jumping.
Patricia, you were an insightful guest to interview, and I thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Wow. Well, you asked good questions, and it was my privilege to be able to answer them. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It was insightful and eye-opening to interview Patricia about her book and her life. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding you all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.